Hello, welcome back to the No Way Jose podcast. We're here again with another Weekly Wolfson with a friend of the show, Matt Wolfson, digging into another weekly dig into one of his pieces. Not a new piece this week. Couple older ones, but that are very prescient now with the DSA sweep currently occurring. So we'll be talking about all that. What does it mean? Take a look back at history. What does this mean for the future going forward? What does this mean for people on the right side of the aisle? Yada, yada, yada. Plenty to talk about. Now, for those who like seeing this show, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications. That way you can see when we're dropping new episodes and we're going live. And with that, we'll see you in the
No way, Jose.
The following footage proves beyond any doubt that the tanks intentionally set the house on fire. It proves that the Branch Davidians were murdered. You can see that this tank has a gas jet on the front that shoots fire. You can also see the fire quite plainly. The tank goes into the house twice, and each time as it backs out, the fire at the gas jets is plainly visible.
We must all do more to recognize and look for the early warning signals that deeply troubled young people send.
Hello, Matt. Pleasure to have you back with us today. For people watching this, a video having a little bit of camera issues, but oh well, we persevere. We'll figure it out in a later episode. Pleasure to have you with us. Today we're talking about how to survive the Democrat Socialist Apocalypse, or DSA for short, if being a little clever here. Just been a kind of a DSA sweep occurring recently, so it's become pretty prescient. You wrote a couple pieces, particularly honing in on Zohran Mamdani, but obviously we can extrapolate this phenomenon into the larger group and kind of what this means. So I dug into a couple of your old pieces. One I think I'd already read, but got to redig through another one of them. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about all of this. I guess maybe if you want to go ahead and set it up and give your thoughts on why you just felt like we should talk about this week. Obviously, it's timely with stuff going on, but anyways, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks as always. It's great to be here. I'm sorry I'm not here on camera. In the last 3 days, 3 of Mamdani's candidates, all of whom are associated in one way or another, and these are his candidates in New York, with the Democratic Socialists, have won primaries, and given the makeup of the electorate, they're going to be in the House of Representatives, barring something wildly unforeseen in a year. And a Democratic Socialist candidate has won in Colorado, and beating a 7-term congressperson, I think. And a Democratic Socialist candidate has won the Democratic primary for the mayor of Washington, D.C., on top of the fact that Seattle already has a Democratic Socialist mayor and New York already has a Democratic Socialist mayor. And whatever you think of, so this week, probably more than any week, I guess, in American recent political history, has been a sweep for something that until recently, American media defined America as against. We're not socialists, we're not communists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I got interested in this, almost a year ago. I lived in New York for about 8 years until the early 2020s. I was very interested in what Zohran was doing. I knew Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was, sort of the first, besides Bernie, of the Democratic Socialists. I knew her a bit before she ran. And so I thought I'd sort of seen this thing as it had taken off, and I also knew some things historically about it. And the main thing that really the point of these two pieces addresses, one that I wrote in August and one that I wrote in October of last year, is that whether you agree with democratic socialism or you don't, or whether you're neutral, and I agree with some things and don't agree with others, this is not something new and radical. I mean, from 1900 to 1930, multiple cities and towns and congressional districts elected socialists in America. And they elected them because big industry, at that time, big manufacturing, not big tech or big finance, were leaving workers behind. And we're seeing the same thing now. And specifically with Mamdani in New York, you can look at his victory as the unintended epitome of 50 years of finance colonizing New York City. I mean, in most of the 20th century, New York was not run by finance. It was run by, there was a sector of elites who had influence, but it was run by wards. It was run by unions. Starting in the late 70s and early 80s, finance really took over, many of them being Zionists. And it really hollowed out the city over many, many years, beginning with Giuliani, then with Bloomberg. It hollowed out the middle class, hollowed out the working class, priced out people. And Mamdani is a natural, if not even belated, backlash. So when I see people saying, oh, this is such a shock, socialism has come to American shores. Well, 100 years ago, socialism was in many cities in the Midwest, in the West, and places we would now call the heartland. And it was here for the same reasons it's in New York and in Seattle and in DC, and is going to Congress because of massive income inequality. So a big part of these pieces were saying, this isn't unpredictable. This has happened before, whatever you think of it. It's not some meteor from out of the blue or some massive threat. It's a direct product of mismanagement of government for half a century.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to step on you.
That's it. Thanks.
No, I was just going to make. You brought up the Colorado. I believe it was the Colorado, or maybe I'm misremembering here. But either one, I'm pretty sure it's the Colorado individual. You said that's been, I believe it was in multiple digit terms of the person had run, but I might be wrong. Either way, I know the person that they blew out actually had taken office their first time before that person was even born. So I think that's really kind of indicative of what we're dealing with. Also, I think it's kind of rich in the sense that it's like almost cyclical. I think it's something I got from reading these two pieces, like the cyclical nature of this, the socialism bug, kind of as a reaction to essentially a legitimate corporatism, strain, and this gets subverted into corporatism, and then it just kind of then rinse, repeat. And it looks like we're kind of experiencing this all over again. Perhaps with the Zohrans and some of the other people coming in. Obviously, there's lessons to be learned too from say people that are more on the right of this too, kind of like what's going on here, how we're going to weather all of this. But feel free to address any of this. But I think maybe kind of to the point of this being a reoccurring problem, historical thing. Maybe if we could kind of run through a quick history, particularly the early 1900s. Into the late 1900s of socialism politics in the United States, because they do kind of keep recurring when we have these periods of like prolific robber barons, it seems, and so it makes sense that we see it reappear now.
Sorry, no, that's exactly it. It's when we have these periods of, and they're robber barons, but robber barons almost make them sound too impressive because it makes them sound like they have initiative. Now, in the 19th century, John D. Rockefeller was, by all accounts, a monster, but he had a lot of initiative. In the late 20th century and in the early 21st, the Silicon Valley people were basically geeks and nerds who graduated from good colleges, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and then got a bunch of money from the CIA and the federal government via Silicon Valley. I mean, these were not, they were talented people, obviously, what they were good at, but they weren't roll up your bootstrap, up by your bootstraps, roll up your sleeves, self-made men. And so essentially what we're dealing with, to borrow a line from Bernie Sanders, is corporate socialism. And we've been dealing with it for 30 years. We've just been calling it capitalism. And we dealt with this 100 years ago, though, with, a bunch of robber barons who had, if I can say this, bigger balls. I mean, they actually had to go out in the oil fields and kill people and risk being killed. None of the people today have that. I mean, Jeff Bezos, none of these people. But 100 years ago, I mean, the robber barons made a bunch of money, got into contracts for railroads, for oil, for steel with the federal government, became their preferred buyers and sellers, got very, very powerful, and didn't feel that they needed to give workers anything, which is pretty much the position we're in now. And from 1900 to 1930, socialism got very, very popular because workers, it was very logical. It wasn't like, a bunch of people from, quoting Das Kapital, came over from Europe. Workers just looked and they said, look, like, government is giving a bunch of money and a bunch of contracts to these fucking freeloaders. Why aren't we getting them too? Why aren't we getting welfare? And the great sort of, success of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal was it sort of stopped socialism in its tracks by partnering with corporations and saying, look, we're going to need to create a welfare state. And you're going to need to not fight us too hard on this, or you're going to get really radical people, socialists, communists, who are going to take away your property. And it pretty much worked. Starting in the 30s, we didn't have anything approaching socialism. And there were little flare-ups in the 60s, but we haven't had anything approaching socialism until the 2010s and 2020s after the 2008 financial crisis. And one of the more, and this really is the more astonishing thing to me, again, to borrow from Bernie, the capitalist class, the class of people who are getting money from the federal government to start their corporations and to sell their products to the government. The people who are, Bezos, et cetera, have contracts with the Pentagon. They're acting as if people are being that somehow what Mamdani is doing is unreasonable. That somehow, this is, Stalin coming to America. And you can disagree with some of his policies. You can agree with him. You can have different views. I'm mixed. I like him very much, but I don't agree with all of his policies. But I think to talk about this as anything other than a natural response to crony corporatism's excesses is completely unrealistic. And I'm a little baffled that people in power insist on treating this as an anomaly. I read in the Wall Street Journal today, Democratic Socialists take over the Democratic Party as unrest spreads. And all I could think of is, what do you mean unrest? You should be lucky people aren't in the streets rioting. This is peaceful electoral victories to transfer power. So I'm a little stunned that people in power are this, hyperbolic about what this represents. I would think they would be welcoming it. Inequality has been so insane for the last 20 years. I would think that they would welcome people who welcomed a peaceful transfer of power. There's no Luigi's. Zohran Mamdani is not saying, we should go shoot people in the streets. Crime has been down for the last 4 months because he kept Jessica Tisch, the Zionist billionaire, commissioner of police in New York, on. I'm surprised they're not welcoming him.
Yeah, which that obviously opens a whole other door of concern of what does this mean? Kind of as alluding to this being cyclical and these these political moves essentially being co-opted, whether organically or whether artificially or not. It just seems kind of interesting. This guy is kind of this anti-war, anti-Zionist firebrand. He keeps on Jessica Tisch. What is he going to accomplish whenever he's done here? He's going to probably increase the size of the bureaucratic state. It'll probably, in the end, he'll probably end up, under the visage of something resembling, socialism, essentially, actually, usher in more corporatism. So this will end up serving, their needs, all while, letting him be this boogeyman for, I guess perhaps Zionism. I'm not sure to what degree that's just like the idiotic kind of intrinsic response from certain people with the way he talks. But if you kind of look long game, it just kind of looks like this will end up. I mean, he's a mayor, so it's like, what is his in the end? What is his take on foreign policy really a matter other than symbolically too? So it looks like he'll probably get defanged when it comes to the anti-corporatist side of all of this. And in reality, the his anti-Zionist tendencies won't really seem to make a difference, since whatever whatever Zionist ends they may want out of him, I think they'll probably end up getting, because they're not the sort of war type. We're not going to really see that in a domestic sort of thing. So my point being is just almost like you're getting the worst out of both sides here. Am I cooking with anything here? But because I think there's something interesting in how this essentially this whole impetus, this movement gets co-opted.
I think I would have been more likely to agree with you a couple months ago. I looked at, he brought in some people from sort of the centrist Democratic establishment, people linked to the Soroses, people linked to Andrew Cuomo, and I decided that he was going to sell out pretty fast or make some deals, and I'm not actually seeing that. I mean, I think it's significant. I mean, I agree with you that to some extent he doesn't have any control over Israel. In fact, he has no control over Israel. But outside of Israel, more Zionist Jews live in New York than any other place in the world. And to have a mayor who's willing to regularly condemn Israel, who's willing to, and he does, and who's willing to promote the interests of Arabs, Muslims, I think that's, and who's willing to speak out against capitalism. In other words, I don't mean free market. I mean, billionaires in the center of capitalism, who's willing to, pass a rent freeze and essentially screw landlords, some of the most powerful people in New York. I mean, to me, that's significant. And I wouldn't have said that 2 months ago. 2 months ago, I would have said you were basically right. He has been so consistent in everything he's said. And now, I mean, the big line, I read the New York Times all the time because I lived in New York for a number of years and I like the New York Times. And I don't always agree with them. I don't often agree with them, but I like them. And the big line leading into Tuesday, the primary day, was Mamdani is doing something no mayor has done in 50 years. He's risking his credibility to elect because he's the mayor. I mean, why is he backing House candidates? Why is he backing Assembly candidates? And the whole line on this was they're likely going to lose and it's going to be a black eye for him. Well, they all won. I mean, he took a major risk, and the people they beat were people who get their money from Park Avenue, from Zionists, from financiers. And the people in office now going to Congress are people who don't get their money from those people. And so I actually think it's a pretty big deal. I mean, I'm as someone who's, anti-Zionist, and who's anti certainly the whatever Israel's become the last 16 years, I'm hugely enthused by what he's done. And it's certainly not what we're seeing on the Republican side. I mean, Thomas Massey, God bless him, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, God bless her, got drummed out of Congress. So I think he's the most effective politician in the country on the issues I care about.
Yeah, obviously, as you kind of laid out, what the concerns of a co-opt. I mean, even if it is like an organic co-opt of sorts, is the Tishes of the world and the certain Zionist agendas that are clearly at play. And you've wrote this kind of quite extensively in a number of your pieces. Essentially, kind of the move to like Zionistic, future cities. And actually not even necessarily future. You kind of almost see them in some places around the world already, but obviously, we'd have a little bit more of a first worlder twist on this. Almost kind of like creating like a third worlder anarcho-tyranny, you could almost say, which I think is kind of interesting when you think about the role that these sort of bleeding heart socialist types could play. I mean, me and you are kind of concerned more on the right, more libertarian, although I know a lot of our audience are kind of border hawkish. I'm not, although I'm not really someone who's. I'm also not this socialist type either. I think there's something to this like welfare mentality, and if you are like, I don't like the idea of subsidizing welfare, but it also doesn't mean I want to empower a police state to go around the country and kick people out. Like, it's not. I feel like it's not a crazy binary. That's the way I look at it. But it's like you almost have to be forced into one or the other here. But being as I feel like the Zohrans and other political actors and the similar are kind of that binary of where they are kind of essentially advocating for subsidizing immigration and welfare, stuff and all the things that come along with it. And I think this kind of essentially you can kind of see how this can lead to essentially this anarcho-tyranny, like dystopia, with this almost like rings of like classes that like maybe aren't necessarily, actually enforced, but in a certain dystopian way they kind of manifest. I don't know. I think you kind of get what I'm stepping in here. But I just think it's interesting if we could just talk on the role that these sort of political actors could play, and then maybe after that we can kind of talk about how we can address that and make sure that doesn't become the case.
Well, I think the danger, and we've talked in the past, and I've been more critical of him. I think the danger in this conversation is I'm going to be way too supportive of him. But I think I'm going to sort of double down on it, and then I'll sort of back off in a later conversation, maybe if I'm off or if I've overcorrected here. I think they have and I've watched them pretty closely. I know some people involved in this. I mean, not well, but I know them. I think they're trying to do something pretty peaceful here. I think they're not trying to get anarchistic. I think they're trying to make public services, whether busing or groceries that have been privatized for, 80 years, but during World War II weren't, for example, privatized, and I think they're trying to do that. They're trying to freeze rent, get the government involved. And I think they're trying to do that to make life more manageable for working people who make up the majority of New York. And, when you look at the way they organize rallies, when you look at the way they do crowd control, I don't see anything disorderly about it. They seem to try to get people out there. And I've watched this pretty closely, actually. I mean, they try to get people out there to go in the streets to protest for what they believe in, but they're very careful to do it peacefully. I mean, they bring cake, they bring buses. I don't know. I mean, they're pretty benign about the whole thing. If you were to ask me a risk in the long term, it's that they publicize so many. In order to get power away from the billionaires, they'll publicize so many private services, whether busing or housing or groceries or anything else, or the subway, well, I guess it's already public, but I mean, they'll publicize so many of these services that they will give more and more power to a central government. I think that's a perfectly valid concern. The problem is anything you could call a free market has already been taken away from New Yorkers by these false public-private partnerships of the last 30 years. I mean, if you look at development in New York City, it is in no way free market. It is based on a rotating series of big developers with ties to the mayor. I mean, it's corporate socialism. So while I think that there's a danger that too much bureaucracy will come from Mamdani's tenure, I think he's correcting something that's far more insidious. And I'm certainly not sure he'll solve the problems, but as somebody who lived in New York in the 2010s, when rent was going up, when, huge numbers of people, 30% of the people were spending, 2/3 of their income on rent. Middle working class people were being displaced from the city. When he does a rent freeze, I'm whooping for him to do that. So yeah, I think like any project where you give government control of free market activities that has a lot of risks, I just think government has already taken control the last 30 years. So I'm not cheering for him unambiguously or unambivalently. I just think he's a correction, however flawed, to something that's way worse.
Yeah, I totally get the impetus from people from the left. The idea is like everybody's in on the take. At some point, it's like, why don't we stick up for ourselves, and why don't we get in on the take? If everyone else is in on the take, we may as well get on the take. But I think the concern is that I'm trying to describe, and I think maybe the disconnect here is that we're talking about the broader DSA movement, and not necessarily we're using Mamdani as kind of like a placeholder of sorts.
You're right.
But like I think maybe a better example of kind of what I'm getting at is the abundance agenda. And I think kind of what I'm getting at, this idea of like everyone gets this idea of Gibbs, and like, oh, just free Gubsman's money, free Gub money, and let's just get to the people. And so then you get these ideas. People end up having ideas like the abundance agenda, which is similar, I believe, this is in like housing sorts of projects. Like, oh, we'll just throw government money at it, but this ends up being incestuous. This ends up being corporatist. It ends up being benefiting. So it ends up just being this like recursive loop. This like just like feeds right back into itself. So even when you do think for a moment, you're like, oh, the people, you're like, then they just blur this line and it comes right back to, once you've opened the door to like, well, it's legitimate to just be giving away government money, stealing from the people. It's you're a hop, skip, and jumping away from accidentally sliding right into corporatism, because you're like, what is even the major distinction here? But I guess with that, if you want to talk a little bit, I do find it particularly interesting, the abundance agenda. I know there's some left-wing individuals here that kind of. How do I say this? Characters that people find to be the ones that are pushing this. I don't know. People find suspicious some of their ties to like the Teal-averse and stuff like that. But either way, it is kind of this seemingly taking the face of this progressivism, socialistic whatever that's being created, and putting essentially allowing it to work for corporatism.
Well, I think you've gotten in, unerringly to the major flaw that I see in Mamdani's, and I'm a fan of Mamdani, as you can tell at this point. But it's not my politics. But I think in this context, it's a really good politics. And nonetheless, I think you've gotten to the flaw, which is that a big problem in New York is housing. They're actually running out of housing for new people to come there. And Mamdani's trying to solve it. And he's coming up against a Democratic establishment, mostly Zionists, the Andrew Cuomo's, the former staffers to Bill Clinton, to Obama. He's coming up against an establishment who wants to solve this via what you said, which is the abundance agenda. The abundance agenda is a agenda proposed in a book by New York Times writer Ezra Klein and the Atlantic writer Derek Thompson. And basically it says, it's basically corporate socialism. They don't call it that, but that's what it is. Government should shovel a bunch of money to private corporations to develop apartments, to develop, real estate, to develop parks, to develop, subdivisions, to develop anything on the cheap. And that way, get rid of the red tape, and you can create a lot of housing for people. You can create neighborhoods for people. A lot of Republicans, centrist Republicans, like it because they think it's free market. It's not. It's just saying, let the government give to private corporations. Let them give them subsidies to develop without anybody looking. And Mamdani is not really for abundance. I mean, the politicians who are for abundance are to the center of the Democratic Party. Mamdani's to the left. But in order to compromise with them, in order to get anything done in New York, because they have a lot of power, Mamdani has had to go along with some of that agenda. And the result is, without going into too much detail, he's going to empower big developers to develop both expensive and cheap apartments. And it's really what he needs to do to survive. But the result is, as you say, the rich are going to get richer here. The corporatists are going to get richer. It's not because that's what Mamdani wants, but he doesn't have a real choice. And that's a real weakness in his agenda. So, yeah, he's operating on behalf of the people, and he's doing some great things from my point of view, but he's also empowering the same crony capitalists he ran against, whether he means to or not,
Yeah. Now, what major lessons do you think maybe people along the lines of more like me and you should take from this? People maybe more along the lines of kind of right-leaning, liberty-ish, and then I guess after that you could probably even weave this in and out, of this discourse. Just kind of the idea of the pull of this message to people like us. Or maybe not even necessarily us, maybe more kind of your standard, kind of the MAGA voters. There's definitely kind of a lot of overlap. I mean, I think there's a lot to say about like Zohran kind of in a certain sense is kind of just a well-spoken younger Trump in a lot of ways. But the floor is yours. I think you kind of get what I'm getting at. Just a lot to go on there.
Well, I think that MAGA and the Democratic Socialists have something in common, which is that, whether via tariffs or via Social Security or via welfare or, via busing or via grocery stores, they think that government money should be redirected to ordinary people. I think a lot of people trusted Trump on the right to do some of those things. And I think there were, if you looked closely at this in 2023, 2024, whether you were dealing with antitrust, or tariffs or policy towards unions, there were a lot of people who looked to be rising in Trump's party, Josh Hawley, J.D. Vance, who were very, very those pro-worker, pro-redistributive approaches. And, they weren't for Medicare for all, which the Democratic Socialists are. For example, they weren't for environmental legislation, but they were for pro-redistributive policies that would help workers. And Trump has pretty much shut the door on all of that. I mean, he seems to have gone off on these larks with Israel and with, supporters of Israel and neocons who want him to invade a bunch of countries. And, he's literally saying, housing. I mean, he literally said the other day, the housing bill is boring. He's really abandoned that. And he's drummed out of Congress anybody from Massey to Green who cares about that. And so, and I think this is probably one of the reasons you're hearing me so positive about Zohran Mamdani, is that he's really one of the few politicians who seems to be willing to get elected and then follow through on his promises to workers and to the middle and working class. And honestly, I mean, I'm sorry this sounds so pessimistic. I I don't see anybody on the right who's doing that. I mean, I see a lot of normal people on the right, people you and I like, who believe in it. But in terms of politicians, after Massey and Green, I literally see nobody doing that. And so, to me, the only currently, now this may not be the case in 2 years, but currently the only viable, I mean, Vance is in office, but he's essentially neutered by Trump. If you look at the pro-union, pro-antitrust, anti-corporate people he brought into government with, many of them have actually been fired. I'm not exaggerating here. And so to me, Mamdani's the only person actually doing the kind of things that Trump promised to do. You know, again, I'm sorry I sound so positive. I am personally so very impressed that somebody's following through on what he's been elected to do. And put that down to, you know, whiplash, because Trump was you know, he said, I'll end the deep state, I'll end foreign wars, I'll end corporate subsidies, and he's done all the opposite. So to me, what I think Republicans can learn is maybe follow through on your fucking commitments, because the only two people we have that did, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tom Massey, were forced out.
100%. And a good way to end it. I mean, hey, if you come in on the right telling everybody, hey, we got a bunch of gibs to give out, and then you don't gib, don't be surprised when the left comes in and offers a whole lot of gibs a whole lot harder, and you may not like how that works out. But with that, Matt, go ahead and let people know where they can find you. Sorry, I'm cutting it a little bit close. I'm actually watching my kitty little surveillance camera. My kitty's definitely getting ready to go now, so I gotta skedaddle out of here.
Sure.
Got kitties coming, but let people know where they can find you at. Let them know where your work's at. I know you can find over at, was it Op-Ed Research? Or never mind, I'm screwing it up right now.
Oppo-research.com. And
there you go. Oppo. There you go.
Yeah, you can see. Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead. Let people know where they can find you at, where you put your work out and the like, and we'll see you here next week for sure.
Looking forward. Oppo-research.com and at Oppo__research on Twitter.
Awesome. For those who like what I'm doing here, leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes and Spotify. You can find this show on YouTube, Rumble, all the major audio podcatchers, and Twitter as well. You can find the show on YouTube. I'm an idiot. I screwed that up. On Twitter, that's at TowerGangJose. And if you want to support the show the best way you can do that with money over at patreon.com. So there's No Way Jose 2020. Lowest level is $2. Highest level, no, at the $2 level, you get a whole host of perks. You get early episodes like this one right here. Try to do about 1 to 2 of those per week. Keep 3 to 4 of them behind the paywall at a given time. Give you guys access to ad-free RSS feed. Give you guys access to Telegram, the pre-show, the post-show, and video calls of me and Austin's weekly live con show, which is on Tuesdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Also, give a big shout out to Heisel, my patrons. A big thank you for their support. And my previous Ghost and Tower Gang, at Learn Toad, also at Brigade D's, at ZOVRCK, at _Invizeal, Tim Tuttle, at Jolly on Klebold. Big fan of the show, Torrin May, at Wayne Tackers, Winter Cover Kids, No Free Lunch, Jack, Mark Festbill, Jacob Wintergrad, Biblical Anarchy Podcast, and John Black, you beautiful bastard. And with that, we're going to get out of here. We'll see you guys in the next one. Love you all. Bye-bye.